Hello again, everyone. I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of the New Character Matters program. The program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, the character crisis that we have faced for several decades now, and that affects every aspect of our lives, from our world affairs to our community relations, and most especially our interpersonal relationships, particularly our intimate interpersonal relationships. Every aspect of our lives is affected by the character issue. We used to know this deeply, and we used to attach a great deal of importance to developing character in ourselves and in one another, in encouraging it. And we also seem to understand what it took in the way of embracing and living out important principles that help shape good character, that encourage good character in others, so that we can come to expect it from one another in our relationships and in all of our affairs. Slowly, incrementally, a classic and negative vicious cycle descended upon us, whereby as more and more character impaired people, folks arrested in their overall character development, entered the society, structures and institutions and cultural expectations, cultural norms, etc., began to erode and become increasingly corrupted. And as that happened, an atmosphere of entitlement and narcissistic self-focus began to dominate the culture. More and more character-impaired people emerged on the scene. It's a classic vicious cycle that has to be reversed. And toward that end, I've written all of my books and published numerous articles free of charge on my blog at drgeorgesimon.com. You see the URL up at the top of the screen. www.drgeorgesimon.com. And my most recent article addresses perhaps the most fundamental aspect of decent character. Ultimately, we can define what it means to have solid, mature character by one's capacity to love, to genuinely love. Not all the characteristics that we come to equate with what we commonly call likability have all that much to do with the capacity to genuinely love. Many folks have personality characteristics that are quite endearing, that are somewhat naturally attractive. Some individuals have incredible charm and charisma. They may be good-humored. They might be easy to get along with. But these personality traits are not in themselves indicative of solid character. Character is that aspect of a person's personality that reflects one's grounding in important principles that make wholesome relationships possible, that make truly loving relationships possible. Character is that side or aspect of personality that reflects a person's integrity, their internal moral compass. And when it's solid, relationships can be wholesome, enduring, truly growth fostering. But we live in an age where too many things arrest a person's character development. Character is one of those things that has to be very carefully nurtured and in the right way. And in my most recent book, Essentials for the Journey, I expand upon the 10 commandments of character that I first introduced in Character Disturbance, my second book, many years ago. Time-tested, time-honored principles, life lessons important behavioral axioms that not only have to be learned, practiced, but deeply taken to heart for an individual to be of truly solid character and capable of genuinely loving and wholesome relationships. We witness today the horrible consequences of affording individuals of greatly flawed character the reins of power, individuals for whom only their grandiose standing in the world matters, and who are willing to do almost anything, even the unthinkable, to maintain a position of power and dominance. We see this on a micro scale in some relationships that are always destined to be toxic, but we also see it on a grander scale. And as I've mentioned many, many times in all my books and my numerous writings, character disturbance is a spectrum phenomenon. There are various types and degrees, levels of seriousness of character dysfunction. Not all narcissistic individuals, for example, are alike. Some are actually quite amiable. That's how they hook you in the first place. And today I'd like to emphasize one thing, and I would urge you also to read more about it on my blog at drgeorgesimon.com. And that is that likable traits in and of themselves are not indicative of good character. And that means that they're not indicative of a person's capacity to truly love. And this is why so many relationships run into trouble these days. At the outset of a relationship, too many people experience high hopes that come with finding the traits that they see in their partner highly desirable, attractive, and they equate these desirable traits, whether they be amiability, ease to talk to, showing of intense interest toward you, saying all the right things, doing some of the right things, displaying charm, certain amount of charisma. All these things lead a person to have very high hopes for a relationship. And most especially if a person has not yet developed a solid enough sense of their own self and hasn't firmly embraced their own set of principles, they can be very vulnerable, carrying high hopes into a relationship that later on turns out to be toxic. And why? Almost always because the other person in the relationship really doesn't have the capacity to genuinely love. Genuine love has certain qualities to it. And it requires that the lessons that I outlined, the principles, the moral axioms that I outline in Essentials for the Journey and explore in detail, that those things be firmly embraced, starting with the first commandment, which is appreciating the much bigger picture, that it's not all about you, that we live in a much larger context, and that everything that we do has impacts someone and something else in some way. And the mark of solid character is to care about the nature of that impact, to want the things that we do and say to have a positive impact, to help facilitate growth, well-being, instead of just self-serving. And that's only the first commandment, the very beginnings of character, but it has to start there. and just the very beginning of developing the capacity to genuinely love. I spent many, many years studying this issue and in counseling thousands of individuals in troubled relationships. I was taught some very important things, and that is very few people go into a relationship thinking that it will fail. Some folks do, and some folks go into it with a somewhat lackadaisical attitude, thinking, well, if it does fail, I'll just leave and move on. That does happen too, but very few folks do that. Most of the time, folks are hoodwinked, in a sense, by equating too many other somewhat attractive personality traits with good character. We have forgotten how to discern good character, what to really look for, what to expect, and most especially what to demand if we're going to give our hearts away in a relationship. So over the next few weeks, I'll be talking more about the principles in Essentials for the Journey, the 10 Commandments of Character, the proven principles that when taken to heart and practiced faithfully can help all of us become the persons that we were meant to be and help restore some sanity to all of our lives and some wholesomeness to our relationships, fostering greater prosperity and well-being for all. So until next time, I'm Dr. George Simon. I thank you for tuning in. I urge you to go to the blog and avail yourself of the many timely articles available free of charge, and to also avail yourself of my books, In Sheep's Clothing, Character Disturbance, The Judas Syndrome, How Did We End Up Here, and the work I'm the most proud of, my most recent work, Essentials for the Journey, Embracing and Living the 10 Commandments of Character, proven principles for not only an emotionally and psychologically healthy life, but a spiritually rich life as well. Until next time, then, take care.